did your car get hit by another car?
Yes, it did. It hit my driver door.
Were you hurt when this car hit your car?
Yes, I was. That vehicle came flying. I don't know which direction. I couldn't see who it was because my airbags came out. People who were there, they were telling the officer it was 3 people in this vehicle, and they hit this young lady.
Our next caller was in a car crash in the state of Georgia, and she does not know if she can win her case. It's complicated, but luckily we have car crash expert Brett Turnbull here. Let's get to it. Now I'm gonna hand the phone over to Brett. Brett's listening. He's here. Brett is the Georgia car accident guy. He's done hundreds of these, so I'm just gonna let him walk you through the analysis because I think he's gonna do a little better job than I could. So I'm just gonna hand it over.
Okay.
Hi, Margaret. Brett Turnbull here. Did your car get hit by another car?
Yes, it did.
All right. What part of your car got hit?
My driver's side got hit.
All right. And when it hit your driver's side, I mean, was it a big impact? Did it feel like did it feel like a big crush?
Yeah, it did. It hit from my driver door to, I say, maybe the end of my fender.
All right. So you're out there. You're in your car, of course, and you said you were sitting still when you got hit, right?
I was proceeding to make a left turn.
I see.
The turn.
Sure.
He told me to make 2 lefts.
Okay.
But it didn't dawn on me. Once I made that first left, you need to put your left turning signal on and make a left turn instead of putting your right turning signal on, making a right turn. So I ended up making a right. And when I came to a complete stop, I stopped right there, and when I proceeded to make my turn, that vehicle came flying. I don't know which direction I guess they were trying to go straight, or whatever the case may be, but they didn't have any turning signal on. So I guess they were trying to go straight. I was proceeding to make a left turn.
I guess the final question I'll ask of you, a couple here, 2 questions left. Were you making a left turn from the right lane? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, I was actually sitting in this apartment complex.
I see.
Right there at the corner, where the stop sign and stuff is.
Okay.
In that little that complex. So I was sitting there waiting to proceed to make my left turn.
I got you. And the car that hit you, did they have a stop sign or a stoplight that they ran through, or were they just driving down the road and you?
No, they were just driving and flying down the road, pretty much.
Gotcha. And last question, and then were you hurt when this car hit you? When this car hit your car?
Yes, I was.
I'm sorry to hear that. Did you have to go to the hospital and what type?
Yeah, I did go early Thursday morning on the 17th. Around 3 in the morning, I went to the emergency room to be seen. They did x-rays and they gave me medication, but unfortunately the medication that they gave me wasn't helping. Right. So 7 days later, on the 24th, I ended up going to another doctor to be seen, and they gave me medication as well. So that following Monday, I took more x-rays. I have another doctor's visit that I have to go and be seen again to see what's what.
Did you know one way or the other whether the person in the car that hit you, whether they were hurt too?
No, nobody was hurt. Well, I couldn't see who it was because my airbags came out.
Gotcha.
Did they not stop?
I guess people who were there who saw the accident, they were telling the officer, well, okay, it was 3 people in this vehicle. Why did two run? And they hit this young lady. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, I'm really sorry to hear that you got hurt. Obviously, it sounds like your wreck is one that would require investigation and some deep investigation to get a better understanding And so, there are different things that we do, obviously, to investigate a car crash such as this. And some of those things include, talk to the witnesses who were not in your car.
Do you have a police report?
Yeah, and I'm assuming that they wrote up a police report for you?
Yeah, they did.
Okay, and on the police report, believe it or not, it's actually not something that in court is admissible, or that police reports in court are not things that the jury would get to see in the event that the case went to trial. But do you recall whether the police officer said it was your fault or the other people's fault, or did he say it was anybody's fault?
Well, he basically said that I failed to yield.
Gotcha.
Which I thought was a fucking mess. You get what I'm saying? At the fact that how the accident took place and how I got hit.
Gotcha. Understood. Well, I'll tell you, though, the investigation would require us to do further inquiry because, believe it or not, the police report is not admissible. The police officer wasn't present. And so while we do respect, obviously, law enforcement, their opinion in this particular matter is not the end of the road, right? That's just the way it works.
Yeah.
And so, we can talk about that some
for sure.
as we go, too.
Well, let me do this. I'm going to send you an email. We're going to send you an email and do a request for information, and we'll see if there's other options for you. But right now, you've got an uphill battle with this one, okay? This is not a slam dunk, okay?
Right.
All right. We'll be back in touch. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Bye. If she fails to yield and she makes a turn, is there any way that she could get out of being at fault for that? Like, what if the person was going 100 miles per hour that had the right of way? Like, is there any argument that you could even make there?
There potentially it's possible. I mean, impossible means unlikely, but possible. Anytime someone turns, think about it in a simple context. She essentially made a turn to the left across oncoming traffic. And in normal circumstances, what you would say is that obviously she didn't see that car.
Yeah.
Right. And so in that particular, it failed to yield the right of way is obviously what the police officer found. In other words, she had the obligation to see that car and to wait and let that car pass. Now, there are extreme examples where a car is, like you say, maybe there's a bend. I think she mentioned there was a bend. Some of that's going to make, further inquiry, some more detail might be necessary. And you're right, aggravated speed, or, there could even potentially be, depending upon the circumstances, there are times where there's claims against the property owners close by that they have a hedge, right?
Yeah.
Or they have unkempt, property attributes that block. I've even had a case before years ago in a very similar situation where someone had put up a huge construction sign. Okay. And the lady, and the reason I say it's similar is because my client was at the end of her driveway, and she was an older lady, and this is her house. And for whatever reason, they had put this huge sign to her. Like if you were to look left, it would block the traffic coming directly at her. And she pulled out, and unfortunately, she was hit and killed. Okay.
Wow.
And so that when I say it's an unusual circumstance, but like when you saw the size of this sign and how much it blocked, the view of being able to turn left, that's an extreme circumstance. But, obviously the company that put it up there, we actually tried the case. We went all the way through trial on the case because they said, well, she should have figured it out.
And that's a case that a lot of lawyers would have just been like, well, you're not going to be able to win. And you found that.
Yeah, I think it was such that's why in a lot of these scenarios, sometimes there's very specific factual inquiry. Like there's specific facts that have to be looked at. Sometimes it just kind of is what it is, and somebody's at fault, and there's nothing we can do for them. And in Georgia, it's comparative fault, which we get into the legalese, as we call it, where somebody has a percentage of fault potentially, but they're still able to recover. In other words, in this scenario, Margaret would have been a person who had a percentage of fault, and if the car was going at an aggravated speed to where it was a closing distance.
Let's make them drunk too. Maybe they're drunk too.
Sure. Whatever the case may be, where their reaction time is terrible. And so the jury would have the ability to apportion the fault on the car that hit her, and also the fault that she might have had for pulling out without being able to, or without having seen the car. In Georgia, it's what we call modified comparative fault. And so if the plaintiff is if the person who's bringing the claim is 50% at fault or more, then they recover zero. Okay. And so that's the challenge. And in some states, it's what we call pure comparative fault, where the plaintiff gets a percentage of whatever it is all the way down to 1%.
A couple of these scenarios that I've seen have been around the bend, obstruction from a nearby property, if it's conditions that they're not driving in the right conditions. So it's dusk or night and they don't have their lights on, or they only have one headlight on. If you look at a vehicle that has two lights and then it only has one, you're gauging the speed based on how fast the light is moving.
Yeah.
I've even seen a case where the driver was going at a higher speed, wasn't paying attention, and then couldn't stop their very large truck, which created an issue too. So
there is some responsibility for making sure that what you do, whatever the driver does, even in the scenario where they have the right of way, that a reasonable driver would do under the same or similar circumstances. That's, again, just a legalese way of putting, what they do, was it reasonable, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, were their actions reasonable? And so those things are sometimes analyzed as well.
So you're the Georgia car accident expert, and so it sounds like specifically in Georgia, with this, you said it was a modified comparative fault, right? Did I say that right? Yeah. So it's very important that if you're in an accident, you prove that it's the other party.
Correct.
Because if you can't prove at least 50%, you might get nothing.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. So if I get injured, if I'm in an accident and I'm in Georgia, I'm going to call you. How do I get in contact with you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you call our office, right? I mean, you call our office, you'll be put in. There'll be someone who would take down the information that you might have at that time. Yeah. Obviously, these are perilous scenarios where people are hurt, and sometimes they're incapable of a full rendition of things, and all those.
For when I'm in an accident, what is the first thing I need to be considering?
When you're in an accident, the first thing you consider, obviously, the biggest thing is that depending on the circumstances and how badly, how bad things are, right? I mean, if you're obviously capable of giving a statement to the police officer, if you're capable of, sort of being aware of your surroundings, things like that after the crash, and those things are important, because oftentimes if there's a dispute, right? Sometimes people who are in crashes and it's their fault don't tell everybody honestly what happened.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it might be your word against theirs to some extent.
Sure.
Taking down witnesses' names and phone numbers. A lot of times, you got to think a witness who doesn't, as we say, down south, don't have a dog in the fight. Those witnesses who are just we call them independent, but what we really mean is someone who wasn't involved in the crash, doesn't know anybody in the crash, doesn't calls balls and strikes. Someone who saw it with their own eyes, and they're able to say who ran the light, or they're able to say what happened leading up to the crash. Those people are pretty important, and I hate to say it, but sometimes they stick around and they tell the police officer who they are and what they saw, and sometimes they just check on everyone and they take off as quickly as possible. So, those are just the type of things that later may be necessary. They may be very helpful, and so I would say, but there may also be circumstances where people are hurt so bad that their actions or their ability to do things in those, at that time are really, they're incapacitated.
So one of the questions I often hear people ask is, what do I do in terms of care immediately afterwards, right? Some folks, just because of their upbringing, they tend to tough it out, right? Like, yep. I'll be fine, I'm going to be okay, which could sometimes lead to them not being able to even understand that they had a concern. And some folks are like, no matter what, I'm going to immediately go to the doctor. Knowing that every case is a little bit different and every situation people got evaluated in the moment, what is the typical best practice from that standpoint?
The best practice is to assume that being checked out, right? And if you have any type of pain or soreness or issues, that the best thing to do is to treat it medically and to go, to a doctor or emergency room, whatever the case may be. And the reason for that is not to just run, to run off and do things that are unnecessary. But if you're feeling those things, then first of all, it can get worse, of course. And I'm not a doctor and I don't claim to be. This is sort of from the legal perspective, that you err on the side of safety. And by erring on the side of safety, that is to also make sure that there's nothing that would be more serious. But the other thing, and I think this is important, from a legal perspective also, insurance companies who would be potentially paying the claim for the people that would have hurt you, or for the car or truck or whatever it was that hurt you, are going to be analyzing the facts and circumstances of not only what happened in the crash, but they're also going to be looking at whether they perceive the person to have actually been injured as they claim to have been,
yep.
And also to what extent. And so if you don't go to the doctor and you don't have medical documentation, okay, that there's a medical provider who is independent, of course, right? And they're taking down what you're telling them. My neck hurts, my back hurts. That is a historical. It's a credible historical analysis or rendition, okay, of the type of things that a person's experiencing. So without it, when the insurance company says, well, you might have say, Mr. Person who's making the claim or Mrs. That you had neck pain the day after the crash, but you didn't go to a doctor. It's not documented anywhere, so we're having to take your word for it, and we're not willing to do that.
And that's why, like, people say a lot of negative things about lawyers, right? But for whatever reason, they don't say the same things about the insurance companies. And the insurance companies are sharks out here, and they're going to do everything they can to discredit your injuries, to downplay it. That's why, like, if I get hurt, I know enough. My first call is to a lawyer like you that is an expert in the field. And, not only do you know how to protect the case, but you'll even cover the medical expenses, right? Like, you'll front the medical expenses for your clients.
Well, the medical expenses typically are fronted or by, whether it's insurance. If there's no insurance, there's other ways that the doctors, a lot of different medical providers now are willing to do to work, help people with their medical treatment and whatnot, and hold that bill. It's not necessarily the lawyers paying for it. What the lawyers do is they're willing to pay for the things that are necessary to bring the claim. And then by that, what we mean is, like, if we had to file a lawsuit, there's a fee associated with that, right? If we had to do certain things to prove it up, hire expert witnesses, whatever, we cover those kind of costs.
Yeah.
And then obviously, if we're unsuccessful, we eat that, and that's. But the idea behind that is really built around we don't want to take a person who is now in a perilous, position. They're going through something they've never been through before in their life. A lot of people obviously haven't been through this type of scenario, and so they're going through it for the first time. They're in pain and they're having issues. Maybe even their life has been disrupted, whether their income or whatever. And it's scary, and it's also stressful. And, so what happens is people need a guidance from time to time, but they also don't need to be put in a worse position than they were before by hiring a lawyer and having to pay them up front. And then the lawyer said, oh, never mind, I can't help you. Well, now you've added insult to injury.
Yep.
Okay.
Right.
And we just can't let that happen. So what we do is that's why we have, kind of put ourselves in the boat with the client, if you will, and row together. And that's the kind of cost that we cover.
A friend of mine once had a case where he was in a motor vehicle accident, thought he wasn't feeling so good, got checked out, said, no, I don't need to go to the hospital, went to proceed to play in a softball tournament that weekend. And turned out he was able to demonstrate that the particular injury that he had sustained was a little more latent, that had been caused because of just the unique way that he had been hit in the car. But one of the largest disputes was the fact that you just went and played a three-day softball tournament, right?
Yeah.
And the complicating factor, right? So folks are not often thinking about that. And again, that mentality of, like, I'm going to tough it out, especially certain cultures, certain parts of the country are like, I'll never do that, right?
Men.
Men. Steel workers,
Yeah.
right? But a lot of folks are, they're thinking about moms, for example, right? How many times do moms put aside their own kind of physical ailments in order to take care of their family, right? Let's say Margaret, for example, is thinking, I got to go do these things. I got to get this car taken care of so I can get to work, so I can provide for my family. And they're like, I can deal with an ache or pain or whatever. And then they don't go in for a week or 2 or 3 after they've done a lot of different things. And it can unnecessarily, the most important concern is it puts them in further physical danger. The risk of something happening later down the road because they didn't get that initial care. And then second, again, after the first physical part, is the second part is it endangers their ability to hold people responsible or get what they should get, whether from insurance or otherwise, because they kind of said, hey, I'm just going to tough it out.
Yeah,
That's right.
And we talked about some of the bad ones, but I want to give you a chance to brag. Like, is there a case that you're really proud of, or a case that, like, you're the most proud of for a Georgia car accident?
Yeah, I mean, there are many, but I will say the one that sticks out to me the most is a client that I had who his motorcycle had broken down, so he was just off the side of the road, and it was getting dark, but he was off the road, completely off the road. We proved that obviously throughout the course of the case, and unfortunately, a guy who was texting and driving veered over and hit my client. And my client went from a person who was, still a young, hardworking fella who had previously been in the military, was a veteran, and a person who provided for his family. And unfortunately, he went to, his brain damage was so bad that he had to wear a helmet, like all the time because they had to do certain types of surgeries on him, like a craniotomy, all the different, had to have a shunt, all these different things. And so he had to wear a helmet to be sure that there wasn't a way that someone could hit his head by accident and cause him further damage. And of course, in that case, they said he was in the road. My client was in the road, and because it wasn't a car-on-car crash, there weren't gouge marks in the roadway, right, from the from the wheels to definitively prove where he was standing. And there wasn't, an eyewitness who was like standing there watching what has happened the whole time.
How'd you prove it?
The way we proved it was twofold. One, where the furrows were, all right, where the car had just run off the road, meaning that there was like, where it hit the grass, was obvious to me anyway that he'd run off the road. And then number two, the other thing is that we got the cell phone records from the guy who was texting and driving. And we went to trial, and we were very successful.
How do you show that? So with the cell phone records, like you just see texts that are being sent, and you can get the GPS. Walk me through that. That's crazy.
Yeah. So there's two different ways that unfortunately, it's gotten easier, right? It used to be extremely difficult, but now we can file subpoenas, right? So we, once the case is filed, we have the ability to go to the cell phone carrier,
right,
and request all calls, emails, and data that were being transferred within a period of time on behalf of whatever the phone number was that we're requesting. So, that it's not actually the content of the text messages is only kept for so long.
Yeah.
So sometimes you can only see what's being, that it was the time and then what was happening, text, data, or call.
So you could see like the cars moving and sending texts.
Correct.
Wow.
Well, we knew enough from the time of the crash, just based off of, we can kind of work backwards on the timeline to know also just to overlay the time. Coupled with when this was all taking place on his cell phone records.
And what was the verdict?
It was $19 million.
Wow.
And
incredible.
Frankly, I thought a lot about that case. I tell you, because they were trying to blame my client for not for having the motorcycle in the roadway, just standing there in the roadway. Which obviously, had that been true, then that would be a very different. Yeah, I mean, it's different. Yeah, of course. Then the person who hits them, they're like, wow, there's no way for me to, it wasn't dark, but it was, becoming dark. But what was really even worse about that situation to me was that the insurance company had a limited amount of insurance coverage for this person that hit him, and before the family for my client, before they hired lawyers, they actually asked the insurance company just to pay for the full limits of what they had. And the insurance company said, we don't believe this is our fault, but we'll pay you half of what the available insurance was.
What was that?
And it was only $50,000.
Oh my God.
And so, when the verdict came back, a lot of people would say, well, how in the world do you recover that? And there's ways. It creates a bad faith situation against the insurance company, where the insurance company has to act in good faith and fair dealing in the state of Georgia. And when they don't do those things, that even if it's above the insurance limits, then the insurance company still has, an obligation. Potentially, in our scenario, they had an obligation to pay the full amount.
Wow,
So-
you got it over the policy limits.
Correct. Yeah,
That is incredible.
but it's all because the insurance company was not. They were going to try to run. It's bad pun, but I mean they were really going to try to do this family wrong, and blame him. And to take advantage of someone who had that type of situation. And of course, the driver lied and said he wasn't texting and driving, and he said it was in the road and all these different things. And so we had to just go peel back the layers of the onion and really investigate it hard.
Wow.
And just really, take him to task for it. But yeah, that was one that meant a lot to me. The family were people that I really admired. They were going through a very, very tough thing, and it was nice to be able to see it all come to fruition in their favor.
I'm so thankful that family had you, man. That's a crazy to go from 50,000 to 19 million and to be like misled by the insurance company like that. That's you're one of the good ones, dude. I appreciate you even being on the show.
Well, thank you so much for saying that. It means a lot, and he needed it. His family needed it. It wasn't just for show. It was to make sure he could be taken care of, and so
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean, the layers there are really incredible. I think people often understand, hypothetically, the idea of there's insurance and then there's the accident, but how those two things interplay. And then you get the idea that, every state's a little bit different, right? You guys are obviously doing incredible work in Georgia, but also around the country, and having the knowledge of how those different systems play, how the insurance standards, right, good faith and fair dealing, and then being able to go peel the layer. It's not just the facts of the case, but it's how the law interplays with those facts that really makes a master of your craft and your team, putting all that energy, like you said, leaving it on the field on behalf of your clients.
Yeah, it is different in every place, and it's a little bit different. And get into the details. I mean, we've had circumstances where early on things weren't written up correctly on a police report, for instance, and we just went and talked to the witnesses. Turns out the witnesses said there was something was totally different, and we were able to clarify and help our clients. So that's obviously it's easier when it's just clear and obvious that what happened. But I appreciate you saying that. It's very kind of you to say, but you are right. In every place it's a little different, and oftentimes there's more than meets the eye. And insurance companies are certainly not always right. I can tell you that right now.
Yeah, and they're going to take some of that basic information and go, well, it's what's in the police report. Yeah. And you think, okay, well, the officer talked to one guy who was actually texting himself on the side of the road while he was pumping gas, and he happened to look out of the corner of his eye, and that was the one witness they used to write the report, not realizing, because either from time or ignorance or whatnot, didn't go find some better witnesses. And that's why having the right team on your side is critical. It makes all the difference to understanding not to create something, but to really get to the truth of what happened in those moments that changed people's lives for the worse, and they could just be left in that bad situation.
No doubt. And I mean, you're correct, not to create something. But like in your example was a good one, in the sense of that would really, in my opinion, be an insurance company not doing the right thing because they were trying to create something. Someone who's standing there, who's not paying attention, right, and who's not actually able to even see. I've had witnesses that claim to do things, and you go to where they're standing, they can't even see the area where it occurred.
Right,
like they're blocked. There's not even a physical. It's physically impossible.
Yeah.
And who knows what the agenda is, or who knows? And maybe it was innocent. And maybe they thought they saw, but those are the kind of things you got to go look into. You can't just mail it in.
Right.
That's for sure.
Brett, you're the man. Thank you so much for coming on. I feel like we've learned a lot. And then if people get in a car accident, especially a car crash, I'm gonna learn that. I'm gonna learn that. They know where to reach you. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
If you have a crazy legal story and you want to talk to some lawyers anonymously, for free, call us.
Wait, we're not getting paid?
Nothing at all. I don't know how we're gonna pay for it, to be honest.